We are going to process the raw data into meaningful information. So that procedure is called as what? Data analysis. Researcher has to ignore the personal bias. So he has to think in respect of the user and he has to edit the data. The editing which takes place immediately in the field where the researcher have collected the information. So that is known as field editing. So in order to make the data analysis very easy, so this coding is very essential. Hello everyone, I am Harshita, lecturer, Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. My dear students, today we are in the first session of Unit 5 of the subject Business Research Method, and this is for 5th SEM BCom student, and the Unit 5 of your Business Research Method is Data Analysis. So already we have discussed few of the units where we have learnt about how to collect the data, what are the sources of data, and in this unit you are going to learn about data analysis. So let us see what is this data analysis. Now, to have a brief introduction about data analysis, so you know, after identifying the objectives of research, so what they are going to do, what the researcher will do, he will collect the sufficient data or information in order to get the results of research work. So whatever the data which is collected by the researcher, so it will be in a raw format, in the sense there are number of data or number of information which will be collected by the researcher. So in data analysis, we are going to segregate those information or we are going to compress those information into meaningful information, that is known as what? Data analysis. So what do you mean by data analysis? So whatever the information or whatever the raw data which is collected by the researcher, so it has to be compressed. So it has to be compressed in such a way that only the important information will be recorded in a research report at the end of the research work. So unnecessary information or any other extra information or insufficient information or wrong information, everything that has to be deleted here. So we are going to modify the information, whatever which is being collected by the researcher in this stage, that is known as data analysis. So a very important concept, that is a very important task in the research work, that is data analysis, where the whole information has to be compressed in such a way that only the important information will be recorded in the research report. So let us see what is this data analysis, what are the activities which are included in the data analysis. So we shall learn step by step. Now we shall have an introduction about data analysis. So here data analysis is nothing but processing of data. So we are going to process the raw data into meaningful information. So that procedure is called as what? Data analysis. So processing of data is one of the chief functions involved in any kind of research. As I have already told you, whatever the information which is being collected by the researcher, everything that cannot be included in the research report, or in order to attain our objectives, that is research objectives, so all the information what the researcher have collected, so that cannot be included there. Only the right information, only the sufficient information has to be included, so that task takes place in this data analysis. So after collecting the data from various sources, of course, I have told you, after collecting the data, so the data can be collected through various sources. It may be primary source or secondary source. So whatever may be the situation that the researcher is going to collect the data, but whatever the sources or whatever the data which is collected from different sources, so that has to be filtered. So that has to be filtered properly, and then only the right information or only the correct information has to be recorded in the research report. So the researcher focuses his attention on the analysis as well as interpretation of data. So this is a stage where the raw data is going to be filtered into meaningful information. Data analysis include data processing. So these are the few concepts or few processes what are included in data analysis. So it may be data processing, examining difference and measuring the relationship between the variables. So here these are the activities that are included in data analysis. So data continues to be raw form unless and until they are processed and analyzed. So as I've already told you, all the data and all the information what is collected by the researcher in order to do his research work, so it will be in the raw format. In the sense, whatever the information which is given by the informants, in the same way it will be preserved by the researcher. So it will be in a raw format. So it has to be processed so that it will become the meaningful information. So data continues to be raw form unless and until they are processed as well as analyzed. So processing is a statistical method. So this data processing is what? It is a statistical method by which the collected data is so organized in such a way that it will be directly communicated to the users. So that is or that comes under data processing. It is an intermediary stage between the collection of data and their analysis and interpretation. So before communicating the information to the users, what the researcher has to do? Researcher has to make sure that only the right information is being interpreted or it is being communicated to the users. So for this purpose, he is going to analyze the data. So let us see what are the steps which are involved in processing of data. So in this unit, you are going to learn each and every step in detail. What are the steps which are involved in processing of data? So here data, if I am speaking about data, it's nothing but the raw data what has been collected directly from the informants in order to do his research work. Now we are having only raw data. So let us assume we are the researchers and we are having only the raw data which is being collected directly from the informants. Let us see what are the processes which are involved in order to convert that raw data into meaningful information. So the following steps are involved in data processing. Let us see what are the processes here. So the first one is editing of data. So we are going to learn each and every point in detail in the further session. So in the whole unit you are going to learn only about this. That is what is editing of data, next what is coding of data, what is classification of data and what is tabulation of data and data diagrams. So let us see how the raw data is being processed through these steps. Now coming to the first one, that is editing of data. So what do you mean by editing? So normally when we prepare a material, we will edit the information. So what is this editing? In the sense, deleting all the unnecessary information, or if there is any mistakes, we are going to correct that. So all these happens in editing of data. Now, whatever the information which is collected by the researcher directly from the respondents, so we can't tell that it is 100% true, correct? So in order to make it meaningful information, some changes we have to make. So that is known as what? Editing of data. So let us see what is this editing of data under research work. So editing is a process of examining the data to detect errors as well as omissions. So what we are going to do? So this editing is mainly conducted in order to see through that whether there is any mistakes or whether any important information is been left out to be included in the data. So that is done through editing of data. So what we are going to do under editing of data? We are just going to check or we are going to detect errors, whether there is any mistakes, whatever the data what we have got. So whether there is any mistakes, as I have already told you, we can't get 100% results from the respondents. So for that reason, we have to check whether we have made any mistakes or whether some important information has been left out. Omissions means what? Some important information is been left out to record. So that we are going to check under editing of data, and to see that they are corrected and the schedules are prepared for tabulation. So if it is correct, then whether it is ready for preparing the table format or whether it is ready for going through a tabulation process. So that is editing of data. Let us see what are the other aspects which are included under editing of data. The basic purpose of editing is to correct the errors and remove the doubts. So as I have already told you, so if there is any mistake, so we have to correct those mistakes, or when we record the transaction, so or when we have already collected the data, if we have any doubt in that particular aspect, we have to correct that so that we will get the meaningful information. Editing is automated to avoid the entry of personal bias. So here what the researcher has to do, researcher has to ignore the personal bias. So he has to think in respect of the user and he has to edit the data. The editing function involves a careful exploration of the data set out in each questionnaire or schedule. So what is going to do? Normally we will collect the data through questionnaire methods, correct? So it's not that all the questionnaire will be correctly filled by the respondents, or certain respondents may wrongly fill the questionnaire. In that situation, so these editing of data takes place where they have to go through each and every questions and check that whether respondents have written it properly or not, or whether the respondents have given their original opinion or not, or whether the respondents have filled the questionnaire properly or not. So each and everything they are going under this stage. So editing will play an important role in evaluating the field force, the use of questionnaire and to help surveys. So suppose if we don't get the sufficient information through questionnaire method, then we can go through other method also, or we can redistribute the questionnaire and collect the sufficient information. This provides an optimum platform for optimizing the activity of research process. Now what you have to remember under this whole editing of data is nothing but we are going to find out the errors, or we are going to find out if any important information have been left out to collect. So that we are going to record under, or that we are going to see under editing of data. So editing will be done in two steps. They are, first one is field editing and the second one is centralized editing. Now we shall learn about what is this field editing and what is centralized editing. Now coming to field editing, as the word itself tells that, field editing means what? Here the editing, that is the corrections or the omission or the identification of omissions. So that will be done immediately where the information is been collected. Suppose if the researcher have gone to a market where he is going to collect the information from the respondents, in that situation, after collecting the data, immediately he will check all the items, all the information or data what is being collected. Then if he has any doubt, he can consult those respondents immediately in the field itself. That is, in the place itself, the editing takes place. In the place of collection itself, the editing takes place. That is known as field editing. Okay. So the data editing function conducted immediately in the field. That is, the place where data is being collected, there itself the editing takes place. That is known as field editing. So the data editing function conducted immediately in the field where the data is collected is known as field editing. Hope you are clear with the meaning of field editing. So here it is very simple. Field editing means what? The editing will take place immediately where the data has been collected. This involves searching and correcting the glaring omissions and inaccuracy at the source. So, what is the main intention of field editing? In order to check the inaccuracy. Suppose if the respondents have made any mistakes, or if the respondents have not answered the questions properly. In that situation, he can immediately contact the respondent and fill the questionnaire. This helps in controlling the field force and enable the researcher to remove any misconceptions found during the data collection. So, any type of doubt. So, under this, the main advantage of field editing is that suppose if the data which is been collected is not checked immediately, then he has to wait for a longer period of time in search of that respondents, correct? So in field editing, immediately if he is going to edit that data, then his doubt will be cleared. At the same time, sufficient data can also be collected. The researcher will check the questionnaires to see that whether all the questions are answered or not, whether answers are in order or not, or whether the answers are clearly visible or not. Through field editing, he will come to know how the questionnaire has been filled by the respondents, whether the respondents have answered all the questions or any questions have been left out, or any mistakes which is being made by the respondents, and it is whether it is clearly visible or not. Each and everything will come to know immediately in field editing. The primary editing can be carried out by the researcher or by the field supervisor. Now, who will do this field editing work? So, here the researcher himself can do the field editing, or he can appoint a field supervisor. So, for that particular area, he can appoint a supervisor where on behalf of researcher, he is going to collect the information. The completeness, clarity, consistency and uniformity of the data can be ensured through primary editing process. So, here he will get a clarity information, at the same time inaccurate information through this field editing process. If the data is collected through interview method, the researcher will clarify the doubt of the respondents at the spot instantaneously. So, what does he will do? Suppose he is going to collect the information through interview method. So, it's not that he is going to collect the information only through questionnaire. So, he can collect the information through interview also. Suppose if he has any doubt in that, then he can directly ask the respondent. So, he can clear his doubt immediately through field editing. Then the researcher can complete the function of editing. So, this is a very easy process where immediately, and this is suitable for such type of research work where the number of respondents is very less and what the area or what the field is going to select. So, if the field is with a high population, then it will be difficult for him go for field editing. So, it should be a calm place where all the respondents should be available immediately. In that situation, field editing will be suitable. So, sometimes the respondents may not answer all the questions. In such situation, the researcher can write the answer on the basis of answer received from other respondents. So, this normally happens. So, it doesn't mean that all the questions of the questionnaire has to be compulsorily answered by the respondents. There are certain respondents who do not answer the questions. In that situation, majority answer will be taken or majority answer will be considered. Okay. So, majority answers will be considered and it will be filled by the researcher by himself. So, this is about field editing. Hope you are clear about field editing. So, what you have to remember here, the editing which takes place immediately in the field where the researcher have collected the information. So, that is known as field editing. Now, coming to the second type, centralized editing. So, this is opposite to field editing where the researcher is not going to collect or not going to edit the information immediately. So, he will take everything or he will take all the information to his office. There is going to edit the data. So, that is known as what? Centralized editing. So, after the completion of field editing process, the centralized editing will begin. That is, after field editing, the centralized editing will begin. In the sense, in order to recheck whatever the information or whatever the clarity what we have got in field editing, so that will continue in centralized editing. So, this editing is being carried out in the office. So, where do we conduct this type of editing? In the office. Therefore, it is known as office editing. Now, what is office editing? The editing which takes place in the office is known as office editing. It is also known as centralized editing. In this method, the filled-in questionnaires will be collected and stored in one place and the editing work will begin thereafter. The office has skilled editors and they are well trained in the field of editing. So what they are going to do, whatever the information which is being collected by the respondents, so it will be stored and it will be taken to the office, and in the office there will be skilled editors who is going to edit all the data. So that is known as centralized editing. So each editor is instructed to edit the specific part of the questionnaire. That means the concept of division of labor takes place here. So in the sense what? Suppose there are more number of data which has been collected by the researcher. In that situation, only one person cannot edit everything. So in the office, all the information will be brought to the office and all the questionnaires or all the information or all the data will be distributed among all the skilled editors, and they are assigned to edit that particular work. So here whatever the data which is being collected, so it will be distributed among all the editors and division of labor takes place in the office, because each and every work of editing will be divided among all the editors and individually they are going to edit the research work. Each editor is given guidelines. So all the guidelines, all the information, everything will be given by the researcher to the editor. So based on that, the editor is going to edit the research work. So guidelines for editing purpose and advise them to follow instructions to ensure uniformity. So in order to bring uniformity in the editing work, so the whole editing work will be distributed among skilled editors and they are personally going to edit each and every data. While editing questionnaires, if there is no coherence in two or more questions, inaccurate answers can be easily deducted. Of course, when we are going to identify the errors, when the number, suppose if there are 10 respondents and 5 respondents have answered one question and 2 respondents have answered other question and 2 respondents have answered other question. So here there occurs a doubt. Suppose all the respondents have answered the same question, then there is no doubt. So easily editing work takes place. In the sense how they are going to choose the answers. So inaccurate answers can also be identified through observation process also. So depending upon the information or depending upon the selection what the respondents have made based on the answers, based on that editing takes place. If the given answers are doubtful, then majority of the person what they have given the answer will be considered as final. Same as field editing. So if certain respondents have not answered a particular question, then what the majority have answered, so that answer will be taken into consideration. So this is about centralized editing. So we have learnt about editing and two types of editing, that is field editing and centralized editing. Now coming to the next concept, guidelines for editing of data. So what are the guidelines that has to be taken by the researcher while editing of the data? So editing is accompanied by certain guidelines. They are, let us see the guidelines one by one. The editor is required to follow all the guidelines relating to the editing work. Of course, in order to bring uniformity, all the guidelines or all the instructions has to be followed by the editor. Next one, the editing process should be free from personal bias of the editor. So here, personal interest should not be considered into or should not be considered while editing of data. So here, the personal bias of the editor has to be ignored completely. Okay. So here, if he involves into personal bias, then what happens? Whatever the information that has to be presented in the research report will go wrong. So personal bias has to be totally ignored. Next, the editor should have the knowledge regarding the research subject matter. So only if the researcher has the knowledge about the subject matter, or on what basis the information is been collected, or on what basis the data has been collected. So if he has knowledge on that, then only he can go for editing. The editor should identify the wrong entries and he should discard them. So he should be able to identify the wrong entries and what are the omissions which is being made by the respondents. So everything he has to come to know. The editor should use pens with different colors for editing purpose. So if we use different colors for editing purpose, then it will be, or this interpretation will be very easy. So normally editing will be done by the editor by using the color pens. So these are the guidelines which has to be taken by the researcher while editing of data. Next concept is coding of data. So we have learnt about the first process of data analysis, that is editing of data. Now the second process is that coding of data. Now let us see what is this coding of data. So coding is a process of assigning different numbers and symbols. So different numbers and symbols will be assigned to each answers for easier identification of the results. So this normally we will do. So there are two types of coding. One is pre-coding as well as post-coding. Now what do I mean by pre-coding? That is before collecting the data. So what the coding what we are going to make, that is known as pre-coding. So normally we will do this pre-coding in the questionnaires. Suppose we will record all the questions in terms of serial numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, correct? And all the options may be written in the form of any symbols, or it may be in the form of A, B, C, D, or any bullets will be used. So this is known as pre-coding, that is the coding or the number or the alphabets what is being given to the answers for the easy identification. Suppose if the coding is not there, then the researcher or the editor has to check the particular answer only. So if there is coding, suppose if the answer is A, then he has to just identify A. Okay, so he need not identify the whole answers. Okay, so coding is done before research work, that is before collection of data, that is in terms of questionnaire, and post coding, that is after collection of data. So after collecting of the data also, certain symbols as well as numbers will be assigned in order to make the research work easy. So that assigning of numbers as well as symbols for the answers is known as coding of data. So raw data can be converted into digits or numbers and symbols through coding process. This process enable tabulation as well as enumeration functions easy and quicker. Now what is the main intention of coding of data? In order to make our research work very easy. So when we assign codes to a particular answer, our coding or the analysis of data takes place very easily, so that we can interpret the data very easily and quickly. Transformation depends upon certain standard as well as decisions. Coding is necessary for the efficient analysis of the data. So in order to make the data analysis very easy, so this coding is very essential. So as I've already told you, coding means what? It is assigning symbols or numbers or any other pictures to a particular answer, so that identification of answers takes place very easily. So here coding can take place before research as well as after research also. Through coding, several replies can be reduced to a smaller number of classes which contains the critical information required for the analysis purpose. If coding is not there, then it will be difficult for the researcher because he has to go through each and every answers in detail. So if there is coding, then he can either go for B answer or C answer. So B indicates what? Coding. Okay. So if you have seen the questionnaire, so you might have seen the questionnaire where the questions will be serially arranged 1, 2, 3, 4, and the options also A, B, C, D, or with any other pictures or with any other bullets it will be identified. So that process is called as coding of data. So researcher will take coding decisions at the time of designing the questionnaire. So as I've already told you, this is known as what? Pre-coding. That is, while designing the questionnaire, in order to make the identification of answers easily, so certain codes will be given. It may be in the form of alphabets, or it may be in the form of numbers, or it may be in the form of Roman numbers. So they are known as what? Pre-coding. So this will enable the pre-code of the questionnaire choices, and which will turn or which will turn will help for computer tabulation. So this will help the data to be analyzed very easily so that we can prepare the tabulation also easily and quickly. In case of hand coding, so what happens in case of hand coding? Some standard method will be applied. One such standard method is a code in the margin with a colored pencil. So here also they can use the colored pencil in order to indicate the codes. So different color indicates different codes. So other method can be the transcribe the data from the questionnaire to the coding sheet. So after taking the answers or after taking the data from questionnaire to the code sheet, so this will help, that is coding will help. The person who assigns code will form rules for the purpose of encoding purpose. He conveys the meaning of each code more clearly. So this should be done by the researcher only, because he will prepare the questionnaire and he will prepare the code. So whatever the code he has done, so while analyzing the data, he has to give instructions regarding encoding of data also. That is how we are going to take into consideration those codes in order to analyze the data. So this is about coding of data. So what you have to remember here, coding means what? Assigning numbers, symbols or any other alphabets. So to each and every answers in order to analyze the data very easily and quickly. So this coding will be done. So if the answers to questions are more in numbers, then subcodes may also be used. Suppose how the coding takes place. Now this is the first question and the options are A, B, C and D. Now for D option also there are few more options. So how to identify? So we shall give the Roman numbers 1 and 2. So these are called as what? Subcodes. Okay. So these are called as subcodes. When the options are more, then the subcodes can also be given. So many times code are assigned to response with the help of checklist. So the main intention of coding is nothing but in order to go for smooth running of tabulation work. Okay. So this is about coding of data. Now coming to the next concept, that is third process, classification of data. We have learnt about editing of data. We have learnt about coding of data. Now we shall learn about classification of data. How the data will be classified under research work. So classification is a process of grouping the statistical data under various understandable homogeneous groups for the purpose of convenient interpretation. So in order to make the data, raw data into meaningful information, so what are the classification we are going to make? That is, we are going to make the classification based on type of the data or through geographical classification. So there may be several types or several concepts. Based on that the classification will be made. The main intention is for easy interpretation of data. So maintaining a uniformity of attributes in the basic criteria for classification. So we are going to use a basic criteria. On what basis we are going to classify the data? So the main intention of classification is for easy interpretation of data. So under classification stage, we are going to classify based on some criteria. So it may be related to their region, it may be related to their language, or it may be related to any other factors. So based on that, we are going to classify the data. So classification is necessary since the collected data is huge and it is in diverse form. So we are going to collect the data from large group of people and more data will be collected. So in order to make in order to make those data too simple and too short, we have to classify the data. So it is not possible for presentation and analysis if the collected data is maintained in the original form. Therefore, classification becomes essential. So, as I have already told you, we can't write the research report which includes all the raw data what we have collected from the respondents. We have to compress, we have to make it too short, we have to give the meaningful information. So, correct information should be given, at the same time meaningful information has to be given, where classification of data is very essential in this process because there are more number of data which is been classified based on some criteria. We shall take some criteria and we shall divide those data depending upon that certain criteria, so where we can interpret the results very easily. So a good classification should have features of clarity, homogeneity. So there should be clarity, at the same time there is homogeneity, in the sense there should be, data has to be homogeneous in nature, equality of scale, purposefulness and accuracy. So these are the certain criteria what a classification should have. So it should have clarity, it should have homogeneity, it should have accuracy, it should have equality of scale. So this is about classification of data. Now coming to objectives of classification. So let us see what are the main objectives of classification, why we are going to do classification under research work. So the complex scattered data, in the sense the data which has been randomly collected from the respondents, they are known as what? Raw scattered data, can be organized into meaningful, logical, concise as well as intelligible form. So we are going to compress those data into meaningful information, correct? So that would be the main objective here. That is why we are going to classify, in order to convert those raw data into meaningful information. Now coming to the second objective, it is possible to make the characteristics of the similarity as well as dissimilarity clear as well as understandable. So we can't tell that whatever the information which is been collected from the respondent, it is of similar in nature. So since we are going to collect the information from a diverse group of people, we will get more number of opinions. So that more opinion has to be compressed into a small opinion, correct? So it will be able to identify similarities, dissimilarities as well as whether it is clear as well as understandable or not. Next, third objective is, it is easy to establish comparative analysis of data. So it will help us to compare the data also. Next, it helps to understand the significance of the data. It saves energy of the researcher and its associate. So while doing the research report, it will be very easy if we classify the data based on some criteria, or else it will become difficult. The researcher will get confused, at the same time his associates also get confused. So in order to make the research work easily, we have to classify the data. So it helps to analyze and generalization of data. So we have to analyze the data and generalize the data through classification. Now coming to the next concept, let us see what are the types of classification. So as I told you, classification means what? Based on some criteria, the whole data, the whole bulk of data will be classified. So let us see what are the types of classification here. So the first one is geographical classification. So here the word itself says that based on geographical area, we are going to classify the data, because we are going to collect the data from a diverse group of people where they are from the different regions. So based on the place from where we have collected the data, based on that we shall classify the data. So if the data is collected according to the geographical area, then such classification is known as what? Geographical classification. Suppose if I want to collect the data from Mysore, Kodagu, Bangalore, Chikmagalur, Mangalore. So here 5 places I have collected the data. Now for easy classification, what I'll do? I'll collect or I'll store the data separately of Kodagu, I'll store the data separately of Mysore, I'll store the data separately of Bangalore. So based on the region, I'm going to do the classification. Randomly I'll collect the data, but based on the region I'm going to classify them. So that is known as what? Geographical classification. For example, if the cement production in India is classified according to the geographical areas, then cement company located according to the region is identified for the purpose. Suppose if I want to collect the information on cement industry, so I'll collect from the different region where the cement industries are located. So based on the region, I'm going to collect the data. That is known as geographical classification. Now coming to the second one, chronological classification. Based on some order, I am going to collect the data. That is chronological classification. So if the data relating to a particular phenomenon is classified according to different years. Now I am going to collect the data based on different years. For example, I want to collect the data of various years from 2000. So I will collect from 2000, next from 2001, next from 2002, next from 2003, like that in chronological order I am going to collect the data. So that is known as what? Chronological classification, based on some order. So or based on some month also he can collect the data. So there should be some order. Okay. So different years, then it is called as what? Chronological classification. For example, cement production by each cement manufacturer can be classified year-wise. So this I have already told you. Year-wise, if they are going to classify the data, then it is known as what? Chronological classification. Now coming to the next type, that is qualitative classification. So let us see what is this qualitative classification. If the collected data is classified according to some attributes, so it is based on some attributes, then it is known as what? Qualitative classification. So based on some attributes, so it may be depending upon their gender, depending upon their age, depending upon their qualification, depending upon their number of people who stay in their home. So some attributes I am going to decide in advance. Based on that, I am going to collect the information, or I am going to classify the information. That is known as what? Qualitative classification. For example, a car manufacturing company, before launching a new model to the market, it may collect the data relating to the sale of cars for the past 10 years. So here they are going to take into consideration about past 10 years and they are going to collect the information. Let us see how they are going to collect. So here they have taken the attributes of certain consumers based on their income level, age, profession or occasion or employment, etc. Now these are all known as what? Qualitative information. So based on some attributes, the information is being collected, which is known as what? Qualitative classification. So these are all process of data analysis, where in today's session we have learnt about editing of data, coding of data as well as classification of data. So in my next session I am going to continue with few more process, that is tabulation of data, steps in preparing a table and features of table. So we shall learn about tabulation of data in detail in my next session. So my dear students, hope you have understood today's session. See you all in my next session with a new topic. Till then, take care. Thank you.